In 1429, France was losing a war, a long, terrible war. The English had been fighting the French for nearly 100 years. English soldiers controlled most of northern France. The French king had no throne. The French army had no hope. And then, a 17-year-old girl walked into a military camp and changed everything. Her name was Joan of Arc. She was a peasant girl from a small village in northeastern France. She could not read. She could not write. She had never held a sword. She had never commanded soldiers. She had never been to war, and yet, within 1 year, she would be riding at the head of the French army. To understand Joan's story, we must understand the world she was born into. The 100 Years' War had been devastating France. Since 1337, nearly 100 years of fighting between England and France over who had the right to rule France. By 1429, the situation for France was almost hopeless. In 1415, at the Battle of Agincourt, the English under King Henry V had destroyed the French army. In 1420, the Treaty of Troyes had declared the English king the rightful heir to the French throne. The French Dauphin, Charles, the man who should have been king, had been declared illegitimate by his own mother. France was falling apart. The city of Orléans was under English siege. Orléans was the last major French stronghold, blocking the English advance into the heart of France. If Orléans fell, all of France would follow. The French Dauphin Charles had retreated to his castle in Chinon, uncertain, depressed, and powerless. France needed a miracle. Joan of Arc was born around 1412 in the village of Domrémy, on the border between France and the Duchy of Bar. Her father was a farmer. Her mother was a devout Catholic, who taught Joan her prayers and her faith. Joan grew up tending animals, sewing, and praying. A completely ordinary life. Until she was 13 years old. When Joan was 13, she began hearing voices. She later described them as the voices of Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret. The voices told her that she had been chosen by God for a special mission. She must go to the French Dauphin. She must help him reclaim his throne. She must drive the English out of France. For 4 years, Joan kept this to herself. She prayed. She listened to the voices. She waited. The voices grew more urgent. France was running out of time. Orléans was besieged. Finally, at 17 years old, Joan could wait no longer. She went to the local commander and asked for an escort to see the Dauphin. The commander laughed at her. He sent her home. Joan came back. He laughed again. Joan came back a third time. By now, people around Joan were beginning to notice something. She spoke with such complete certainty, such unshakable conviction, that even skeptics found themselves wondering if she might actually be right. In February 1429, Robert de Baudricourt gave Joan an escort of 6 soldiers to ride across war-torn France. to the Dauphin's castle in Chinon. 11 days of travel through enemy-controlled territory. Joan cut her hair short. She dressed as a man for safety on the journey, and she rode. When Joan arrived at Chinon, the Dauphin Charles decided to test her. He hid among his courtiers, dressed in ordinary clothes. A different, more elaborately dressed man was placed on the throne in the Dauphin's place. When Joan entered, she walked directly past the man on the throne and straight to the real Charles, hidden in the crowd. The court was astonished. Joan told the Dauphin things about his private prayers that nobody else could have known. She told him he was the true King of France, that God had sent her to help him. Charles was moved, but he was also cautious. He sent her to be examined by a committee of theologians in the city of Poitiers. The theologians questioned Joan for 3 weeks. They tested her faith. They questioned her visions. They challenged her. They tried to find any sign of deception or heresy. They found nothing. Their conclusion was remarkable. Joan showed every sign of genuine virtue and faith. She should be trusted. The Dauphin made his decision. Joan of Arc would be given armor, a horse, a banner, and an army. She would go to relieve the Siege of Orléans. When Joan heard the decision, she reportedly said, "Give me soldiers. I will show you what God can do." Joan also had a sword. According to legend, she described a sword buried behind the altar in the church of Saint Catherine de Fierbois. Messengers were sent. They found the sword exactly where she said. Its blade was reportedly engraved with 5 crosses. It had been there for decades, unknown to anyone living. In late April 1429, Joan rode toward Orléans with an army behind her. She carried her banner, white, embroidered with fleur-de-lis, the symbol of France. She had instructed her soldiers to confess their sins, to stop swearing and gambling, to treat civilians with respect. This army would fight differently. When Joan arrived near Orléans, the people inside the besieged city heard that a girl, sent by God, was coming to save them. The effect was extraordinary. Citizens who had been starving and hopeless felt something they had not felt in months. They felt hope. On April 29, 1429, Joan entered Orléans. She rode through the city gates at night to cheering crowds, reaching out to touch her armor, her horse, her banner. People wept. People prayed. People who had given up suddenly believed that God had not abandoned them. The French military commanders did not initially trust Joan. They did not want her in their war councils. They tried to keep information from her, to prevent her from acting without their approval. Joan was not interested in their politics. She went directly to the English fortifications and demanded they surrender in the name of God. They refused. War began. The battle for Orléans was fierce and fast. On May 4, 1429, the French attacked. The first English fortification, called Saint-Loup, they captured it. On May 6th, they captured another. On May 7th, the attack on the main fortress, called Les Tourelles, would decide everything. During the attack on Les Tourelles, Joan was struck by an arrow. The arrow pierced her shoulder, just below the collarbone. She was carried off the field. She pulled the arrow out herself. She wept briefly from the pain. Then she had her wound dressed, and she rode back into the battle. When the French soldiers saw Joan return to the battlefield after being struck by an arrow, something happened to them. They had been faltering. Some had been ready to stop for the day. When Joan reappeared, riding back toward the fortress, the entire army surged forward. The English defenders could not believe what they were seeing. Les Tourelles fell. On May 8, 1429, the English lifted their siege of Orléans. They packed their equipment. They marched away. After 7 months of siege, the city was free. In just 9 days, Joan of Arc had broken the English stranglehold on Orléans. The liberation of Orléans is still celebrated in the city every year on May 8th. The victory at Orléans changed the entire war. Before Orléans, the English seemed unstoppable. After Orléans, the English seemed human, beatable. The psychological impact across France was enormous. If Orléans could be saved, anything was possible. Joan had not just won a battle, she had restored France's belief in itself. Joan did not stop. She urged the Dauphin to march immediately to Reims, the traditional city where French kings were crowned. Charles hesitated. His advisors hesitated. Joan insisted. She told them every day of delay gave the English time to regroup. Strike now, strike hard, strike fast. Joan led the French army on a campaign through the Loire Valley. City after city fell. Jargeau, Meung-sur-Loire, Beaugency, Patay. At the Battle of Patay, the French completely destroyed an English army in less than 1 hour. The English commander, John Fastolf, fled the battlefield. The tide of the 100 Years' War had turned. On July 16, 1429, the French army reached Reims. The city opened its gates without a fight. The next day, July 17, 1429, in the magnificent Reims Cathedral, Charles VII was crowned King of France. Joan of Arc stood beside him, her banner in her hand, watching the ceremony. It had been just 3 months since Joan arrived at Orléans. In 3 months, she had relieved the siege, won a series of battles, marched 300 miles through enemy territory, and seen the rightful King of France crowned in the traditional place. She had done what professional soldiers had failed to do for nearly 100 years. But Joan's story was not finished, not in the way she hoped. After the coronation, political complications slowed everything. Charles made peace negotiations with the Burgundians, English allies who controlled Paris. Joan disagreed strongly. She believed Paris should be attacked immediately. Charles chose diplomacy. Joan led an attack on Paris in September 1429. Without the king's full support, without adequate reinforcements, the attack failed. Joan was wounded again by a bolt from a crossbow in her thigh. For the first time, she had led an attack. That did not succeed. The magic, some said, was fading. In May 1430, Joan was fighting near Compiègne. During a retreat, the drawbridge of the city was raised too early. Joan and a small group of soldiers were left outside the walls. They were surrounded by Burgundian soldiers. Joan was pulled from her horse. She was captured. The Burgundians sold Joan to the English for 10,000 livres, the price of a prince. Joan was taken to Rouen, in northern France, a city controlled by the English. She was imprisoned in the castle of Rouen, kept in chains, guarded by English soldiers. King Charles made no attempt to rescue her. The English were determined to destroy Joan, not just physically. They wanted to discredit her, to prove she was a witch, a heretic, not a saint. If they could prove she was sent, not by God, but by the devil, then everything she had done could be erased. The trial began. The trial lasted 5 months. 70 charges were brought against Joan. The judges questioned her, day after day, trying to trap her in contradictions or heresies. Joan had no legal training, no formal education. She could not read the documents they showed her, and yet her answers were so careful and so precise that the judges repeatedly failed to catch her in any error. One famous exchange from the trial record survives. A judge asked Joan, "Are you in God's grace?" It was a trap. If she said yes, she was claiming to know God's judgment, heresy. If she said no, she was admitting guilt. Joan's answer was immediate and perfect. If I am not, may God put me there. If I am, may God keep me there. The judges could not break Joan with theology. So they changed their approach. They reduced the charges to 12 counts, and they threatened her with burning at the stake. Joan was 19 years old. She was alone. She was in chains. She was afraid. For a brief moment, she signed a document admitting guilt, but within days, Joan withdrew her confession. She said she had been deceived into signing something she could not read. She said her voices had returned. They told her she had done a terrible wrong in signing the confession. She told the judges, "Whatever I have said, I said from fear of the fire. I returned to God." On May 30th, 1431, Joan of Arc was burned at the stake in the marketplace of Rouen. She was 19 years old. She asked for a cross to hold as she died. An English soldier made her a simple cross from 2 sticks. She held it against her chest. She called out the name of Jesus 3 times, and she was gone. An English soldier who watched was heard to say afterward, "We are lost. We have burned a saint." 25 years later, in 1456, the Catholic Church reopened Joan's trial. They reviewed all the evidence. They declared the original trial to have been fraudulent and corrupt. Joan of Arc was officially declared innocent. In 1920, she was declared a saint by the Catholic Church. Joan of Arc was 19 years old. When she died, she could not read, she could not write. She had never held a sword before the age of 17. And yet, she relieved the Siege of Orléans. She won battle after battle. She saw the rightful King of France crowned. She changed the course of the 100 Years' War. She saved France. And 500 years later, the world still says her name. Thank you for watching this story on Storia English. If you enjoyed learning English through this story, please subscribe to Storia English. Every week we bring you a new story from history, told in clear, slow, simple English, so you can improve your listening, vocabulary, and confidence. Naturally, without stress. We will see you in the next story.